Hi, and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jean Farish, and once again, I am glad that you are here with me. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how we're all beginning to look forward to safe travel, and I'm going to share some stitching trips with you that I have either planned on my own or others are planning, where I'm going to get to come and stitch and travel, hopefully, with you. But first, I want to say just a couple words about making mistakes. Some have more consequences than others, and I want to take a minute to make a rather serious sort of public safety announcement or public service announcement about magnifiers. Once again this week, I saw a post on Facebook where someone had burned a hole in their, in this case, a canvas, a needlepoint canvas, that came directly from her magnifier. A hole can be burned in your fabric or your canvas or your chair in a matter of minutes. It's not something that takes hours. And as a direct result of that, you can burn a hole in your project. You can also catch a room on fire, and even your entire house can burn from it if left unattended. So the thing to do is to make sure that you cover your magnifier whenever you are not using it. Even if you get up for 10 minutes to go into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, you need to cover it. Even if you're pretty sure there's no direct light hitting your magnifier, you need to cover it, because these things happen, and they happen far too often than people realize. And I don't want it to happen to you. So take a moment to take some preventive steps. You can cover it with something like a pillowcase. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's as long as you are covering it so that it doesn't, so there's no way that light can come through it and do its thing. Now, there are other mistakes that certainly don't have anywhere near those kinds of consequences, and I want to talk about two stitching mistakes that I made this week. I am working on the Roxy sampler, and here it is. This is part one. There are 6 parts to this altogether, and I had lots of time to stitch this week, and as I realized that one mistake I actually made at the beginning of a row, and I didn't realize it until the end of the row. So let me show you that first. At this point, I've corrected the mistake, but it happened in this row of herringbone stitches. And way back here in the beginning, I made the mistake of leaving 3 threads unworked between stitches when I was supposed to just be leaving 2. And I didn't realize I had an error until I got all the way over here and it didn't line up. Now, as I say, at this point, it's been corrected. But here's a photo of the mistake, like I say, that's way back here in the beginning of the row. And you can see where I picked up 3 threads, or left 3 threads unworked between 2 of the legs of the herringbone stitch. So in that case, I frankly ripped it out all the way back to the beginning because it just made more sense just to start all over again. The other mistake that I made is up here, and at this point it has not been corrected, and that's with the strawberry. You can see where the strawberries are supposed to be flattened off at the top, but this is where I brought it to a point, and so I have 1 stitch too many right here. So what are my choices in terms of fixing this? Well, one is I could just leave it as it is, because after all, it's these sorts of quirky things are what make your needlework individualistic. I mean, it personalizes it, it makes it your own. But in this case, I am ultimately going to be using this for the cover of this design when the stitch along is finished and I have the whole thing revealed. This is a mystery stitch along. So once it's all revealed, I will be publishing it and selling it as a complete sampler. So it is important for my photo on the cover to reflect what the piece is actually going to look like. I know that stitchers rely on photographs to help them figure out what's what. And if I left a mistake there, there's too much of a chance that it could mislead somebody sometime down the road. So let's talk about how this kind of mistake gets fixed. Because I've been asked this question recently about how you go about ripping out and fixing a mistake that's kind of in the middle of something. So this is done in 3 shades of pink. So in the very center, there's dark pink. And it is a triangle shape. And it's followed by a medium pink, again in a triangle shape. But then the last row, again, I'm not supposed to have the stitch right here. So I'm going to go through the steps that I take to remedy this so that you have an idea about how I go about it. Now, certainly there's more than one way to do this. One thing I could do is come all the way here to the end and rip it out to this point and fix it. And you know, if I wasn't doing this as kind of a tutorial, I might actually go that route. But I want to show you how you fix something when you've got one stitch that you need to take out in the middle of something. So the first thing is to say a word about the tools to use. There are 2 things that I use in ripping out this type of a mistake. A needle, a tapestry needle, just like the kind I've been stitching with, and my scissors. I do not use a seam ripper. There's way too much of a chance that a seam ripper can accidentally pick up one of your fabric threads and cut it. And there's really no need for it. So I'm going to just pull up on that stitch enough to make a loop so that I can get my scissors underneath of it and clip it. And again, you've heard me say this, but if you can see the 2 tips of your scissors, you're not going to cut the wrong thing. So I feel very confident in being able to cut that. The other part is still there, so I'm also going to clip through that. Now at that point, looking at the front, it looks like the mistake is fixed. But I have these 2 short ends here that are from the stitch that was taken out. And obviously that's not enough length to secure it. So what am I going to do now? And by the way, I was working from the right side to make sure that I took the stitch out that I intended to take out. Sometimes working from the back makes sense, and sometimes working from the front. It helps if you can remember how you did the stitching. So now that end is plenty long enough. And to get it out of the way, I'm going to dampen it with my sponge just to straighten it out, and it'll make it easier to get that out of the way. So that one's done. Well, that step of it is done. Now for the other end, it helps if you are ripping it out not long after you did the stitching, because it's because then you know how you stitched it, and you know that you can just there it is. You can basically reverse it. Okay, and here's where this was difficult. Is because of course the half cross that's on the bottom was laid down first, and the half cross on top was kind of keeping me from being able to get to that stitch. So I'm actually reaching underneath the top half cross to rip out the bottom half cross. Okay, so there's my other piece. And again, I'm going to dampen it to straighten it out. Okay, now you might say, well, that's not really long enough to thread that back into my needle to be able to run it under existing stitches. So I've shown this before, but I'm happy to do it again. I'm going to show you what I call my Cowgirl Lasso method of securing the tail. So to make my lasso, I've started with just a random piece of floss, just, you know, left over from something I was previously stitching. That's maybe 6 or 7 inches long. I've threaded the 2 cut ends into the eye of my needle, leaving a loop at the other end. So now to secure, start with this thread. I'm going to slip this needle with a lasso under 4 or 5 existing stitches on the back and pull it through until just the loop is showing. And then I'm going to tuck, these 2 pieces that I was stitching with into the loop, or what I'm calling my lasso. And I'm going to start pulling it through. Now what's important is just grab it at the tail end. If you get it too close to the part where you're trying to pull it through, it's really hard. You can just see how easy that was. And then of course, as always, I'm going to cut off the excess. So let me show you again with the other piece that's right here. So I'm going to go under, and I always go under like 4 or 5 stitches on the back until just the loop is showing. The piece that I want to bury goes into the loop, and then you start tugging on that and just pull it through. So those are the steps I go through to correct my mistake. So I'm going to end up having to replace 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches. I'm going to end up having to restitch in order to fix the mistake of 1. So that's a, what's that old thing? A stitch in time saves 9. Well, in this case, a stitch stitched erroneously caused me to have to restitch 8 stitches. So I wanted to share those 2 things with you. And again, the extent to which you take, the steps that you take to fix a mistake is purely a personal decision. A lot of it depends on what impact it's going to have on the design. Now in this case, if I had left that 1 extra stitch, it wasn't going to affect anything else that I was stitching, because there's nothing else that's going to go around that. The thing that happens if you're doing a more complex design and you stitch something that will interfere with something else you need to stitch, then you also have to consider the time that you will take trying to compensate for the changes that you need to make to work around the stitch. So do you leave it? Do you fix it? What's the workaround going to cost you? These are all things that only you can decide. If you tuned in last week, then you know that I had a guest on the show for the first time, and that was Vicki Jennett from Needleworks Press. And we had a great time talking about all kinds of things having to do with samplers. Lots of good feedback from that. It seems that people liked it, and so you can look forward to more of that happening in the future. And lots of good questions came about. Here's one from Counting Cross Stitches. I don't know the person's name, but that's the handle that they're using here on their comments. She said, I've enjoyed the history of the sampler stitching. Are there samplers with someone who has dyslexia? It is so common in the educational classroom today. So it seems like to me that I have seen evidence of dyslexia on samplers, but I couldn't recall a specific example. So I reached out to Barbara Hudson, who is a sampler expert here in the States, and sent her a private message and asked her that question. And so I'm just going to read to you her response, because she says it better than I could. I have come across some that I have wondered about. Dyslexia is a more complex problem than just transposing letters or numbers. I do that myself all the time, and I must constantly edit myself. Webster's dictionary was not published until around 1828. I think that's close. People spelled phonetically and creatively. Sometimes it is just a simple error, and I believe many teachers did not have them, meaning the student stitchers, many teachers did not have them take out stitches when that occurred. Sometimes there's no punctuation, which is always fun to chart that. So many variables. I recently charted a sampler with so many errors, it was hard to tell what she had meant to say. But I don't think she was dyslexic, just not properly taught the rules. I have a sampler that I am now charting with a young woman in her 19th year that embroidered her last name as B-R-O-M-N, and her last name is actually Brown, B-R-O-W-N. I don't think she was dyslexic, she just made a mistake, and her teacher did not correct her. Most everything else is spelled correctly in her verse. She did attend a Quaker school in Ohio, and then she went on to say, I hope that helped a little bit. And it certainly does, I think. So again, with that whole theme of making mistakes, some of the samplers that we reproduction sampler designers end up publishing and sharing with you, part of the intent is to do it as close as possible to what the young lady stitched in the original. And so that means mistakes and all. So that's not to say that people of the time were not dyslexic. I'm sure that that still existed. But we can't assume that every stitching mistake is one that's caused by dyslexia. So like Barbara said, I hope that helps answer that question just a little bit. I actually stopped stitching on my Jane Hattersley because I wanted to leave what little bit there was left to do to be able to stitch along with you. This is a stitch along that begins on April 9th this year, which is the date that's on Jane's original sampler, which is why I chose that date. At this point, I still don't know whether or not that's her birth date or the date that she finished the sampler. But either way, we're going to use that as our start date for this sampler. Now again, this one's not a mystery sampler, and you can get the printed chart, fabric, and floss from one of the participating shops, which I will put in the episode description for you to have. Or you can just stitch from your stash. You can get the printed chart from one of the shops, or you can get a PDF download from my Etsy store. So I hope that you will join us with this one. This is really a fun sampler because, and an easy one to do because it's a motif sampler, and it's, each little motif ends up being like its own little mini project. So it's easy to sit down and say, well, I'm going to do this bird or this crown or this basket of fruit or whatever, in as like one little thing. So it's kind of easy to pace yourself that way. So on to travel and stitch plans. Like many of you, and I hope most of you, we've all been sheltering in place and taking all kinds of precautions in our daily lives and making changes and adjustments to keep ourselves and our family and our neighbors and our communities and the whole world safe from this coronavirus pandemic. And, you know, we're not out of the woods yet. I think we all know that. I think the science shows us that. But we can look forward, I think, to a time later this year and certainly into next year when travel is going to open up and it's going to be safe. So it's not too soon to start making plans. So I have three journeys that I want to share with you. So the first stitching trip that I want to talk about is really, for me, going to be, well, they're all going to be exciting in their own way. The first one I want to talk about is Hong Kong to Singapore. And this is being organized, as I said, by RGE Travel. And they are referring to it as the Healing Warrior Wounds cruise, which I'll talk about that more in just a moment. But first I want to tell you just the logistics of this trip. This is a 14-day cruise that starts in Hong Kong, and we then go on to a couple of ports of call in Vietnam, and then and Bangkok as well, and then we end in Singapore. So what's really appealing to me about this cruise, for, like I say, for so many different reasons. One is I've never been to Southeast Asia, so that's, you know, that's a big thing for me. As a designer teacher and as a fellow cruiser, there are 5 sea days, and the sea days are nice on a cruise because they sort of, I don't know, balance out the go, sort of, not really hectic, but when you're doing a port of call in a city you've never been to and you're not sure you'll ever come back to, then you don't want to waste any time. You get up early and you get off the ship and you go and do all kinds of wonderful exploration type things, and then you come back to the ship and you're probably a little bit tired. At least I know I am. And so balancing that with sea days is wonderful. As a teacher, what those sea days do is it gives me an opportunity to have onboard classes. So on this cruise, I'm actually going to be offering 4 half-day classes. Now, before you ask me what they are, I don't know exactly yet. I have my list that I'm busy trying to kind of go through it and figure out what I think will have the greatest appeal. So that's this one. Now, this is one where I get to come as the guest teacher. As I say, the RGE Travels is the agency that's actually organizing this. So all of your specific questions you're going to have to ask them rather than me. They're a full-service travel agency, which is nice. So you can arrange your airfare and whatnot with them, travel insurance, etc. So I'm giving you their website address. And when you go to their home page, if you scroll down towards the bottom, on the left-hand side, you'll see a list of group travel that they have planned. And you will see the one that's the Healing Warrior Wounds. And if you click on that, then that will bring you to this nice brochure that you can either save or print. That gives you all the details about exactly where we will be each day. So again, this one, I didn't say this yet, this one departs from Hong Kong on February 13th, 2022. So we have almost a year for the world to get safer for all of us to travel. And yeah, so I'm really excited about this. Let me tell you just real quickly how this came about. Was I had the opportunity to talk with Ray, and when he was telling me about this cruise, I said, you know, I know that your focus is on the military, and certainly the men of my generation. You know, Vietnam was a big deal. It was a huge part of my generation's history, and so I find it interesting that people who are in the military are interested now in going back and visiting Vietnam. So I asked him, well, how about the wives? And he said, well, yeah, there'll be a lot of couples that will come. I said, but what are they going to do? So that's how we start talking about, well, how about if I come along and teach some classes? And so that's how that all came about. So this particular cruise is focusing on two of our military heroes. A U.S. retired colonel, Roland Goodry, is going to be taking the cruise with us, and he's going to be doing some talks on board on various topics of interest to our military veterans, and I think the spouses as well. I'm looking forward to attending them. But it's also a cruise that's going to honor and in some ways offer a helping hand to CPO Kenton Stacy from the U.S. Navy. And on the brochure, I'm not going to sit here and read this, but on the brochure, there's a nice paragraph here that tells you a little bit about his life and his service and why we are honoring him and why a small portion of the fare is going to offer some financial aid to him and his family. So I think that all the details are on here, and I am hoping that you will join me. And in the coming months, I will certainly share here on FlossTube more details about that. Obviously, you know, this is some time off. It's almost a year, but right now is a good time to get the information. As I said, you can just go to the website and download the brochure, but you can also go to the contact page on that same website and fill that out and let Ray and the good folks there at the travel agency know that you are interested in coming on the cruise. And then that way they can start some dialogue with you. But this is also a good time to start talking to your stitching buddies. If you have a spouse, military or not, that wants to come on the cruise with you, then that's great. Your stitching, when I say stitching buddy, falling all over myself here. Okay, so who comes on these cruises? Obviously, this one was designed for military and military spouses. And by the way, we'll also be talking about the sacrifices that those military spouses make, because that deserves a little bit of notice and some credit as well. So that was the intended focus of the group. And then now that we're bringing in the whole stitching part of it, obviously some of those will be a combination of military and a stitcher. But it also could be two stitching friends that just like to travel, and like me, they've never been to Southeast Asia, and they'd like to see Bangkok and Singapore and Hong Kong and points in between. You can also bring a friend that's not a stitcher. I mean, it can be, you know, just somebody that you enjoy traveling with, a mother, a daughter, a cousin, whatever. So now would be a good time to start talking to the people in your life and see who wants to come on the cruise with you. And you know, if you come by yourself, the nice thing about coming on something like a stitching cruise is that you don't have to be by yourself. You know, when you have a solo occupancy room, then yeah, when you want to be by yourself, you've got a place to go. But when you want to be with a group, there's all kinds of activities going on. We're going to have short excursions that will be exclusive to this group. I've already started looking into some short excursions that have a particular emphasis or interest in textiles. And yeah, so, you know, if you don't have anybody in your life to travel with, don't stay home. You know, come with us, and you won't be alone. Looking at another part of the calendar, looking at this coming fall, in September, the same group, RGE Travels, is also organizing right here at home the Great Parks of the Southwest. This starts in Chicago for most of us, and we're going to take an overnight train from Chicago to Flagstaff, Arizona. In Flagstaff, some other people will be joining us who might live in the Southwest or on the West Coast or whatever, or because of time or whatever, they don't have time to take the train journey with us. So they're just going to join us in Flagstaff. And either one of those options is certainly doable. This one will leave Chicago on September 20th. And as I say, it's overnight. And then we have 2 days in Flagstaff to do sightseeing. And I'm going to teach an all-day class in Flagstaff at the hotel. Oh, I should also say that on the train journey, we're going to do a stitch along. This is the type of train that has one of those observation cars with a dome, or it's almost entirely glass, not really ceiling, but you know what I mean. Like, anyway, you've seen pictures of it. I'll find a picture and insert it here. So on the train journey itself, we'll do a stitch along. Frankly, it's not going to be a really complicated project because, again, it won't be in a classroom setting. It'll probably all be cross stitch, and that's going to be an optional thing. And I should say that about all the classes, whether the cruise or this Great Parks thing. The classes are totally optional. You can bring your own stitching project, something you've already been working on. And then from Flagstaff, we're going to go to a total of 5 national parks. We're going to go to the Grand Canyon. We're going to go to Zion, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, and Arches. And we're going to go to the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Some of the activities that are planned here is a jet boat ride on the Colorado River, and a cruise on the through the Antelope Canyon. So once we get to Flagstaff and we're there overnight, then after that, everything will be by Deluxe Motor Coach. And this trip will also be a way of honoring U.S. Navy CPO Kenton Stacy. And again, part of the proceeds that come from the fairs will go to offer some financial support to him and his family. And again, just like the cruise that RGE Travels is organizing, you can get this brochure as well from the website. And this one, by the way, is a total of 12 days. And it includes some of the meals, some breakfasts, some lunches, I think dinner maybe one night. And then there's other nights that dinners will be on our own. And again, just like the cruise idea, even if you come alone, you won't be by yourself unless you want to be. So it's just a great way to get out and see part of our wonderful country and enjoy the company of like-minded people. And then the last thing I want to talk about is a stitching cruise that I am involved in organizing, and that's the Stitchers Escapes cruise to the British Isles, which will take place in July of 2022. Now, all the details for this cruise are on the Stitchers Escapes website, including the prices for fares and whatnot. We're going to start registering people we're going to have open registration for this cruise starting on March 27th. And by the way, not only will I be teaching on this cruise, but so will Vicki Jennett. And Vicki and I have put our heads together and come up with some great classes. Now, in the idea of full transparency, though, I need to say that this is sort of a do-over. We had this pretty much the same itinerary planned for 2020, and we had to cancel it because of COVID. So in all fairness to the people who signed up for that 2020 cruise, we kind of offered them first dibs on the cabins in our group. And so they have been registering for the last couple of weeks. So frankly, I think my expectation is that by March 27th, there will still be space to add people. but I just wanted to let you know that we may not have availability of all the cabin types that you see on our website. So that's what I have planned coming up fall of this year, February of 2022, and July of 2022. And I'm hoping that something in that mix will appeal to you and that you'll be able to join us. And as I said, I'll talk more about stitching events in the coming weeks, and in particular, what I want to do is make sure that anybody who's new to cruising gets kind of a good picture of what taking a cruise is like. Because I will tell you that in 2016 was when we first organized a Stitchers Escapes cruise, and we had 77 people in our group, and I had never been on a cruise ship. And I want to tell you that when we got to the dock and I saw how big that ship was, I was just in awe. And I'm sure that other people on the cruise that were experienced cruisers were probably like, well, you can tell she's a newbie. But you know what? That's okay. I hope I never forget what it's like to go on my first cruise. And so I want to give this sort of information and the encouragement that you may need if you've never been on one to take that step and come with us. So that's it for today. I will see you next week, and between now and then, stitch happy and stay safe.